And we are live, and good evening. It's 11:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11:45 on Monday, November 13th, 2023. My name is Mark Kulak, and this is just going to be a fairly short episode. The content that we are going to just be going over tonight, this is really supposed to be the third episode of what we call the Human Genome Project series. And it was my intent to use the abundant available resources, videos and so on, that are like on YouTube, by people who have written extensively on the subject of the Human Genome Project of the United States, and use that as the baseline upon which we can then grow, okay? On YouTube, you can find multiple videos by a presenter, an author, named Robert, and the last name is Cook-Deegan, or -Deegan, CookDeegan, Deegan. Now, you can find videos which are quite extensive, an hour and a half, even longer, or multi-part series, where Robert Cook-Deegan is one of the definitive voices on the history of the Human Genome Project. In fact, the National Institutes of Health brought in Robert Cook-Deegan to interview Francis Collins, Watson, and multiple other people for recorded videos, which are available online to get the inside history, if you will, of the Human Genome Project. I started a few hours ago saying, I think one of these videos might be very educational for the audience. I mean, we know there's probably going to be a little bit of bias. How much bias could there really be, right? And why should we start off with reverse engineering everything when there's already a nice starting point? That's always a rule in engineering. If there's already a tool that works, take it and improve it. You don't always start from scratch. So it's also noteworthy that we have here a book called The Gene Wars by Robert Cook-Deegan. Gene Wars, Science, Politics, and the Human Genome. The date that this book was written, 1994. So obviously the Human Genome Project wasn't done. So you would think that this would be really focused, front-loaded, if you will, on the things that happened up until 1994 with respect to the project, and the project not being officially declared completed until 2001, although, of course, a substantial amount of work remains. And let's be honest, there's still a whole lot of mystery to it. Just because they have a map of a person, there's still a long, long, long ways to go. Perhaps an eternity. Perhaps we'll never get there. But regardless. Now, one thing that's always bothered me about the book written by Robert Cook-Deegan on the Gene Wars, and it's given me a little bit of pause, and I was thinking about this before I downloaded one of these videos and archived it, the Robert Cook-Deegan presentation, and shared it with you, is there's just a couple things in this book doesn't talk about, all right? And for me, it starts as simple as this, okay? I go to the index, and this is a very dense book, by the way. It's 416 pages, extremely well indexed, tons of footnotes, small font, single space, a few pictures, but it missed something. So for those who watch a lot of my shows, you can go to L-E-D, Lederberg would be L-E-D-E-R, and I see no mention of Joshua Lederberg in this book. Now, Joshua Lederberg was not a leader of the Human Genome Project. We know this. That's not a surprise. But he was one of the most important people in getting GenBank up and running, or the origins of that, and some of the earliest computing platforms to do the analysis. Of course, it's been substantially improved. Came out of Lederberg's work, Arthur Kornberg, and so on, out of California. And Lederberg was played a large role and encouraging the initial internet deployments, which were amongst universities, which was going to solve the problem of there not being enough compute and or storage capacity in a particular campus. By networking the campuses together, adding some government branches, they would have the ability to distribute the algorithm, the exercise that they were trying to do. So, although he's not a Human Genome Project leader, okay, let's be honest, he played a significant role. Also, he was involved in extensive levels of legislation and global policy and reflection on what the impact was going to be on mapping the human genome. You just think he'd get a shout out here. Now, perhaps the book was just written in a way that situations that involved Joshua Lederberg simply wouldn't have been necessary to tell the story. It's totally possible. However, if you go to the book, and this is a 1994 print, by the way, and on page 72 to 73, it talks about Carri Mullis. Now, Carri Mullis, as many of you may know, in his earlier years working at one of the first biotech companies, really, Cetus Corporation, CETUS, Carri Mullis conceived of the idea of amplification, which eventually became the PCR technique, if you will. And of course, much has been stated about how, he thought about it on a long car ride and etc. That legendary aspect to it. Now, on here, at the end of page 72, it says Carri Mullis presented his idea as a scientific poster at a Cetus scientific retreat in June of 1984. Okay, we've seen other verification of that. It goes on to say, it was a troubled period in his personal life, and Mullis blew his fuse. He got into a late-night shouting match with another Cetus scientist and was so combative that he kept many awake until past 3 a.m. with phone calls and bouts of yelling. Someone finally called a private security officer to walk Mullis along the beach until he calmed down. His tenure at Cetus was seriously in question. Mullis was creating havoc, shouting, threatening a coworker who was going out with his erstwhile girlfriend, arguing with Cetus's evening guards. When he didn't have his badge to enter the building after hours, rather than fire Mullis, Cetus ended his duties as head of the DNA synthesis laboratory and let him pursue the PCR idea full time. What this doesn't say, and let's go to the Houstonic Archive. Why not, huh? That's what it's there for. Let's go to the Carri Mullis page. And again, I have the episode number wrong. So it's supposed to be, well, I'll fix it towards the end. Mullis, M-U-L-L-I-S. And on here I have a copy of a paper that Carri Mullis himself wrote. I have a full copy of his CV in here, by the way. That Carri Mullis himself wrote, called The Unusual Origin of the Polymerase Chain Reaction. Okay? And in here, if you scroll down, it talks about, and I actually did a whole episode on this. I'm surprised that episode isn't more popular, but it says in spring 1984, while working on the patent, I presented a poster. This is him talking. I presented a poster describing the PCR at the annual Cetus scientific meeting. These meetings were always fun. Nobody seemed to be interested in my poster. Finally, I noticed Joshua Lederberg, president of Rockefeller University nearby, and I snared him into looking in at my results. Josh looked the poster over carefully and then turned his enormous head, the Nobel laureate head, the head that had deduced in 1946 the bacteria could have sexual intercourse. And it was, according to him, Joshua Lederberg found Mullis at the 1984 conference and found Mullis's poster. And that's what ultimately gave Mullis the boost he needed. It took the idea that I guess other people didn't understand and mainstreamed it. Now, this was written in April 1990, 4 years before the book, The Gene Wars. So it appears one of these two stories is wrong. Now, they could both be wrong, but they're definitely not both right. One talks about success because Lederberg, who had also worked with Kornberg out in California, found the work that was underappreciated by Carri Mullis in this 1984 Cetus show. The Robert Cook-Deegan book says that Mullis basically had a meltdown and was yelling at people, and he needed to be cooled off. And I don't know which one's right. The point, though, is if this paper's correct, then this would mean that the mention of Mullis in Robert Cook-Deegan's book, and the reason why Mullis was found and discovered and his work became so important, should include a reference of Joshua Lederberg, at least. However, it doesn't. It's a completely different story altogether. I have not read this book, okay? I've gone through a couple of small sections of it, very specific sections. And I'm actually wondering, how close is it to the truth? Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to, watch along one of these videos with you guys. I want us to take the best stuff that's already out there and build on it. I don't want to reinvent any wheel. So how close is this book? And how close are these videos? Well, one of the absolutely most important people to understand, if you want to understand the virus cancer program, if you want to understand bioterrorism, if you want to understand really the history of virology within the United States, if you want to understand epigenetics, euphenics, etc., you have to know about Joshua Lederberg. He's really the equivalent of the Henry Kissinger of genetics and biotech. I don't know what else to say. He served as a direct representative for 7 U.S. presidents before passing in 2006 or 7, was it? And this book doesn't mention it. This Robert Cook-Deegan book doesn't mention it. Now, Robert Cook-Deegan himself actually works at Duke University. And I found a recent interview of Robert Cook-Deegan. It looks like it was from late 2020, talking about COVID-19 responses, okay? And in this interview, it's only like 21 minutes, Robert Cook-Deegan completely follows the line. He's completely in line with the official narrative. He's using Johns Hopkins resource tracker. He's using New York Times death estimates. He's going to Stat News, which came out of the Boston Globe. He's not questioning protocols. He's saying remdesivir works. He's not talking about all the statistical manipulation within the United States. And he says that the United States now has all of these absolutely amazing genetic tools. All of these flash bang, I forget how he calls it, knock it out of the park technologies that have been working on for so long. But just 100% in line with the official narrative. 100%. And we know how much crap is there. And he also goes on to say that he got his start in the 1980s in the Office of Science and Technology. And we know what type of stuff was going on there, as really the entire future of military conflict was being revisited. And it was unknown what to do with that huge pile of cash that was being spent on the military every year. And the geneticists were just lining right up because they knew that was what they were going to do. Now, I'll be the first to say, having been impacted by military conflicts myself, as far as, PTSD within the family tree and etc., and revisiting the nature of the U.S. military is a good idea. However, when questioning it for the reasons of turning the U.S. population into guinea pigs for genetic experimentation, that's where I start to stammer and stutter, like I'm not so sure about that. But he was in the Office of Science Technology, and then it just turned into eventually he having a medical degree and a law degree. And he's worked as a historian. And I also found it really interesting that he is an official source, if you will, if you go through some of his other videos, on the whole nature of patenting genes. Robert Cook-Deegan is often on stage when it comes to, or called in when it comes to gene patents. And I wonder where he stands on antibody patents. It's interesting that in this 2010 video, he's talking about a major district court which ruled on the inability to patent a particular type of gene or some types of genes. And this was not too long before the protein patent cases started between Centocor and Genentech in 2011, which, as you know, plays into many other people in the alternative, or I should say the intellectual dark web. So I've come to the conclusion that perhaps we will still have a watch party of sorts of one of Cook-Deegan's videos, summary videos. But I just wanted to take a few minutes to set the stage for how much work we have ahead of us. We have a lot of work ahead of us. I don't think that this is just a book that's the truth with a few typos in it and maybe a couple stories wrong. So far, the one story that I've read, out of this book regarding the discovery, Carri Mullis' discovery of the PCR, I've read one story so far. And I'm sure that there's probably about, let's just say 400, 500 individual stories here. Like let's say a page, 1 or 2 stories a page. So far, 100% wrong. That's the history of the Human Genome Project. This is the main author, Robert Cook-Deegan. We got a lot of work to do to figure out what happened. How much do you just assume is true? This book has so many footnotes. I can't imagine a book with so many footnotes, so many references. And the very first thing that I read is wrong. It's already wrong. Amazing. And Cook-Deegan is still actually quite active, clearly, as he's being used as a source, at least by some people, as an assessment of COVID-19. And as you could tell, he was super happy and super proud about how all the amazing accomplishments of the Human Genome Project led to the vaccine technologies for COVID. Because it's always been about gene therapy ever since September 11th, 2001. Or the events of 2001, let's put it that way. So that's it, guys. Take care. Let me just fix the version at the bottom of the screen. It should be 223.3. So let me fix that right now. But I just wanted to share that with you. It's a little bit deflating in a sense because I was so excited to just share some of these other videos with you and then rapidly move forward. But wow, we have a lot of work to do. So that's it, everyone. Take care. I love all of you. God bless. And we will check in again tomorrow.